Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. We welcome you for this important meeting. I give you a few welcome words on behalf of the Institute of European Democrats. We're very happy that Gerrit Jan van Otterlo wanted to build with his people and our friends such an important rendezvous in order to tackle an issue that is absolutely under-evaluated and that is very important in our historical time. We tend to consider that digitalization and the use of digital opportunities for all is something easy and with always a plus sign. It is generally true, but we tend to consider somehow the threats for young generation or less informed people. Young generation, if you know something about extreme challenges, for instance, is something really worrying. Something really worrying for very, very young people, something transforming their life and creating risks. For people, for not acknowledged people, to give an example, the transformation of reality through technology is a danger for democracy. And I recently read that a celebrated cook master, Monsieur Bourdin, who's dead, made an interview in a film about him, but it was a deep fake. His parents accepted that, saying that it was corresponding to his thoughts. But in this documentary, a deep fake represents a person who never intended to say so, never did it, but ordinary people may think and generally think that it was true, correct, and himself. So sometimes we consider those issues, but the event of today is very important to allow us to understand much better how much elderly people and people disadvantaged in the access to digital technology can be excluded and pay a very high price in the current digital transformation. So my welcome is also a message of in which I deeply thank for this opportunity, and I'm certain that it will give legislators, regulators, and the public opinion some important instrument to understand, to better understand, and to act. So thank you very much, and very welcome to all of you.
Thank you, Francesco, for this encouraging words. We try with this conference to bring a subject more into the limelight than it had been before. And to begin with an example, not from the digital age, but simply from the age of people writing letters, of voting by letters. In the last elections in the Netherlands, this March, there was the equivalent of 3.5 seats of the 150, which was voted by letter, which literally ended up in the bin because the wrong procedure was followed by the elderly people. It was the over 70s who had the opportunity to vote, not to go to the election, the poll stations, but to do it by sending in their vote because they were scared of COVID-19. And then the equivalent of 3.5 seats of the 150 in the Netherlands Parliament ended up in the bin. So that's so much for representation of the voters in an election. And still it was considered to be a fair election. And I think if you have that kind of problem, you should look further. We tried to start a discussion today, but this discussion won't end for sure. And I would like to give the floor to Dr. Caroline van Dummelen, who had an assignment made by the Jan Nagel Foundation and the Scientific Institute of the 50+ Party to investigate some issues on the subject of elderly and other people with learning difficulties and things in the representative politics. And I would like to give the floor to Caroline van Dummelen.
Thank you so much. And thank you for the invitation. I'm really delighted to be here in this beautiful European building. My name is indeed Caroline van Dummelen. I'm a sociologist from the Netherlands and specialized in the politics of aging. Is there a kind of clicker that I can actually switch?
Yeah.
Or maybe I should. Oh, he's pointing to something. Just click, right?
Stand here.
Just behind your laptop.
Behind the laptop.
My laptop.
Yeah. No. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
There you go. Sorry.
Thanks. Well, this is digitalization, right? I guess you all remember when you had your first Zoom meeting, don't you? And maybe some of you even have a license to fly your drone already? Maybe? Well, these are all issues that refer to the unimaginable technological speeding up during the COVID-19 pandemic. And also the IT in public administration speeded up at the same period. Think of the corona check. And in fact, just half an hour ago, I had a coffee here and they asked me to pay by some kind of app, which I didn't have, so I had to go to another restaurant. Anyway, this is all part of the what we have experienced in the last period, and the process is often referred to as the development of e-government, and this is my topic of today: how to enable digital confidence. Let's rethink the digital inclusion policies for all the people. Right, click, next. The way internet can increase opportunities for individuals to interact with government and government to seek input from the community, both ways, is often referred to as e-democracy. Now the question is, how can digital governance connect with all the citizens without leaving the disconnected behind? For this research, I formulated 3 questions. You see it here on the screen. In what way all the citizens experience the development of e-government? Will the socio-economic, gender and ethnic segregation or rather increase because of the digital divide? And thirdly, what policy initiatives taken by governments to support the ecosystem that enables the digital inclusion of all the male and female citizens? Is inclusion a matter of time? Very often it says, oh, when everybody will have broadband, then inclusion is nearby. And we still know that in many places in Europe it's not the case. You are sort of unreachable. But when this broadband will be installed everywhere, should that be the case that everybody is included? Well, even in technological advanced countries, it's still problematic, even in the Netherlands. I'll come to that later. Another issue is whether digital inclusion is a cohort problem, right? The next generation will be raised with internet, hence they will be smoothly included digitally in later life as well. However, the current cohort with limited internet use has a long tail end. The millions of people in their 50s and 60s who are not online can expect to live another 20 or 30 years. So they will continue to be offline unless better support is provided. Moreover, even for those who are engaged with existing technologies, like I guess all of us, more or less, the pace at which this technology develops with the learning abilities when aging, is that on the same pace? Many older adults will struggle to adopt new technologies, in particular after leaving the workforce. In conclusion, digital exclusion is not a problem that is going to disappear in the near future. In the EU, of those aged 65 until 74, only 61% is online. And those of the age 80 plus, fewer than 10% uses internet. Mind you, that group of 80 plus comprises of 72 million EU citizens. So more than 20 million of them are not online today. And now here at the graph, if you take the left side, you see that 25% of the USA citizens of 65 plus are not online. I read an interesting report on digital inclusions of older adults in Santa Clara County. Do you know where that is? That is the heart of Silicon Valley. And even there, more than 30% of older adults were not online. Now, within this unconnected group, you can make a distinction between the excluded and the non-users. The excluded do not have access, but the non-users have made an informed choice to be offline. Probably you know people who just don't want to be online. And many of them also have online services and information through their families, friends, and other trusted intermediaries, the so-called proxies. In contrast, digitally excluded people have no means whatsoever of accessing the digital world. An interesting fact is that the unavailability of family and friends and proxies sometimes may drive all the people online, right? If there's no solution, you have to. If people lose their job or there's deterioration in health or loss of a loved one, suddenly creates a need for digital technology, as COVID-19 did for many of us. Now, why are people so reluctant to go online? One of the main things is lack of self-efficacy. That's a vital element in digital inclusion. And here you see a figure that's copied from a research of Mulland, where this is mentioned as the influential factor. Many researchers highlighted the importance of various psychological barriers, like computer anxiety, like frustration with using interfacts, or filling in the wrong letters, but also security issues. I think Itai Mannheim, and the next speaker, will elaborate on this later. But all these factors could be summarized at the lack of confidence in their own ability to learn about how to properly use technology. In fact, you could say that digital literacy, we speak very often about literacy, is a subset of the broader issue of lifelong learning. And so far, lifelong learning is not really a priority in education policy. This week, A few days ago, I had an interesting meeting with Dr. Alison Bryant, who is head of the AARP Research Division, AARP, American Association for Retired People. Huge organization with 39 million members. And she stressed that besides the lifelong learning, also the role of the media representation was very important. 50+ people are underrepresented in online media images. And when older Americans are shown, very often they have gray hair, they are assisted by youngsters, and they are rarely shown using tech devices. So that gets back to you, right? That has to do with the self-efficacy. If you don't see yourself represented, you don't believe that you can do it. Anyway, the AARP has joined with Getty Images in launching a collection of more than 1,400 stock photos that illustrate the active lifestyles of adults, 50+, available for free media outlets. You see here a few of the examples. The issue of self-efficacy refers to the psychological side of digital inclusion. But my second question was related to more structural factors. Will the socioeconomic, gender and ethnic segregation increase or decrease the digital divide? Now, in the EU, access to internet or ethnic minorities, most often migrants from other continents, is usually much lower than that of the majority of nationals. Evident problems are lack of employment, material resources, or understanding the country's official language. But in the US, however, the picture is much clearer. And that is the graph you see here. Black, Latino, and indigenous communities struggle with insufficient digital literacy, language obstacles, and other disincentives to use internet. 70% of black people and 60% of Hispanics respondents reported being underprepared with digital skills. And that, of course, affects their employability. Now here in this graph, you see, this graph is part of the study, Imagining a Digital Economy for All. And researchers of the Fletcher School disaggregated four factors, 4 components for the digital device. And they scored the 50 states of the USA along each of these. I hope you can see it. Yeah, more or less the 4 factors. It's referred to the infrastructure, so internet speeds, broadband coverage, smartphone coverage, infrastructure. Inclusivity, affordability of that broadband, equity of broadband access, actual uses of the internet. Then the third component, institutions, so political prioritization of internet, broadband strategy, best practices of government, of technology of public services, restrictions on alternative local broadband solutions, such as municipality networks, and the fourth component, digital proficiency, how well people can navigate the digital world. Now, this graph shows that the lowest inclusion, you see that the blue lines, the lowest inclusions is realized in states with the highest percentage of Black and Hispanic population in the South. It's a bit of a complicated graph, but I think you get the message here. So linked to these topics, results of several studies highlighted how technology use is also a gendered experience. According to the Alliance for Affordable Internet, men are 21 times more likely to be online than women globally. In fact, this gap has huge socio-economic consequences, as was shown in the report, The Costs of Exclusion, Economic Consequences of the Digital Gender Gap. According to that report, countries have missed out $1 trillion US dollars in GDP as a result of women's exclusion from the digital world. So that is something, right? It means that that digital inclusion is not only a social issue, it's not only a human right, it's also a robust economic topic. And digitalization, the digital revolution is no longer a mere matter of ICT. It involves innovations like blockchain, biometrics, activity sensors, algorithms, artificial intelligence, persuasive technology, Internet of Things, cybersecurity, robotics, etc., etc. We don't know what will come. So take a look at this figure on the digitalization strategy of the Netherlands. The Netherlands is one of the most digitally advanced societies, ranking 4th after Finland, Sweden, and Denmark. So you see here all the domains where digitalization is present. And it gives you an idea that it's really a transformative power for the whole government and public administration. And even in the Netherlands, still over 500,000 people are not online. 500,000 older people. So in terms of representation, again, that is quite a serious issue. Now, how do international agencies like the UN address these issues and support the digital inclusion of older male and female citizens? Fortunately, digital inclusion is now becoming higher up on the policy agendas. The mere fact that we are here today is a sign of that within the political spheres, it's taken up as a serious issue. Recently, also, President Biden launched an infrastructural plan for modernization of the US economy and addressed the widened disparities. 65 billion was earmarked for digital inclusion. And here you see some elements of digital inclusion strategies. Also, the UN is very active. The UN Secretary General published a roadmap for digital cooperation, whereby a vision for digital interdependent world laid out. It laid out actions for a global community to connect, respect, and protect people in the digital age. And the whole idea is a call to connect all people, all globally, in 2030. I come to a close. Obviously, digital inclusion for older people will require a broad coalition of stakeholders. There's no way that only the government or the UN or the public sector can do that. It's an important conclusion. Governments, civil societies, groups, the private sector and other stakeholders must cooperate in realizing to develop an ecosystem to overcome these psychological barriers of the older generation. And also a very important factor is that the digital literacy must be part of a broader lifelong learning agenda. It's not an individual choice, more or less, but it should be institutionalized structurally in a lifelong learning agenda. Also, very important, keep the cost of digital exclusion in mind, right? Address these structural, socio-economic, ethnic, and gender gap. A robust digital inclusion strategy should improve the digital infrastructure, the inclusivity, the institutions, and the digital proficiency. Proper e-democracy should enable inclusive digital literacy and engage with communication technology and online applications designed to encourage digital confidence, digital participation, and digital collaboration. And finally, and critically, we must keep governments and other stakeholders involved in digital inclusion in later life accountable to outcomes. And for that reason, measure that accordingly. Thank you very much for your attention.
We will have later a discussion, but if there's a question to clarify things, I will give the floor to anyone, not for a debate. But if everything is clear, thank you very much, Caroline. I couldn't resist the temptation with all your United States figures to call you Caroline, but no. Then I will give the floor to Dr. Jolanda Lindenberg. She did some studies also on the on what COVID-19 did to the participation of people.
Thank you
Go
very
ahead.
much. Yeah, thank you for the invitation to give a talk here on the experiences of older people during COVID-19. My name is Jolanda Lindenberg, and I'm a senior researcher and staff member at the Leiden Academy. It's a small knowledge center in the heart of the Netherlands, and we study older people and vitality. I'm originally an anthropologist, and during the COVID-19 crisis, we studied their experiences, actually on instigation of older people themselves. So I received several text messages at the very beginning of the outbreak in the Netherlands around February, March, asking us to represent older people in the media because they felt they weren't heard. So this is the background of this study. So just to give you an overview of the study, I'm focusing today on an interview study. We did several other studies, but for today, I'll just focus on their experiences. Here are some of the characteristics of the people that we involved in this interview study. In total, we included 59 older people ranging in age from 54 to 95. Now, 54, I know, seems an awfully young age to call someone older. This is basically because this specific older adult was already living in a long-term care facility because of cognitive issues. So we decided to include this person despite having a slightly younger age. So we did semi-structured interviewing, which is based on open questions during the first wave around March till April. And we repeated the interviews at the end of the summer, so beginning of October, actually exactly around the second lockdown in the Netherlands. As you can see, we had a quite diverse sample of people with a different background, as well as people living in long-term care facilities, people living independent, single, all kinds of civil status. So that as a background to this study. In this presentation, I'll just focus on discourses of solidarity and the experiences of digital connectedness. And there are many other things to say about this study, but for today, given the short time I had for this presentation, I'll focus on that. Just as a background, older adults experienced during the COVID-19, especially in the first wave, like a feeling as if their lives were put on hold. I think many of us can relate to this. They felt especially a lack of meaningful activity, like they lived their lives, but not so much with things that really matter to them. And they felt a lack of opportunity to engage in activities that matter to them. So the experience is very diverse, and also the resilience resources were varied. So some people had a single household, which made it more difficult for them to find support, especially in consideration also of digital connectedness. And for others, they had a household with several people in there who could support each other and do nice things together. So especially the focus on households made it rather difficult for some people and less difficult for others. So in terms of solidarity, I think many in the beginning were worried, not so much for themselves, but especially for those people around them. They were also concerned about the younger generation. So some people said that they were scared that their children or their grandchildren would have a hard time in the future because of the lack of opportunity to develop themselves. So most of them were most worried about the future of others and not so much for themselves. They also had a strong sense of solidarity, trying to reach out to people who they felt were worse off. For instance, people living in long-term care facilities, people in single households, or people that had a harder time in terms of mobility. So a lot of engagement there on the part of the Dutch older adults. So what they found for many people, the representation of older adults was at the beginning considered something justified. But during the follow-up of the media reports and the lockdown measures, these opinions changed. So for some other people, in fact, were rather upset about the way that older people were approached and represented in the Dutch media, and also in the in the press conferences, and the way the measures were focusing on especially those aged 60 plus or 70 plus. So some people really resented the way that the whole group of older adults were considered rather homogeneous and were treated as rather vulnerable, as would be the Dutch word. This was something which they had a hard time self-identifying with. And you can see from the statements on this slide that really some people really didn't feel that they were correctly addressed with the terminology used. And they felt irritated and resented by the way they were represented. Now, in terms of digital connectedness, for some people, COVID-19 was kind of a compulsory step into the digital world. And for some, this also meant quite some opportunities opened up. So people said they were playing games online with their children, that they used Zoom or Teams or other means of video conferencing or video calling. So for some, it did really make them set a step towards digital connectedness, in fact. And they also cherished this digital connectedness. Most of them said that actually this was something positive that came out of the COVID-19 crisis. However, for others, this was less evident. And some people tried to get online or use digital means, but not for everyone this was actually feasible. So you can see from the statement of the older female of 93 that she tried, but she didn't have really support sources in her immediate household to help her out and train her in digital means. And this is something which we saw throughout the COVID-19 crisis, that in fact for those people living alone, especially of those older age, it was very difficult to get online if you weren't online before. So it increased their feelings of isolation. And for others, it was just not an option. They didn't feel compelled to get online, probably related to the issue Caroline discussed, because they lacked the self-confidence to do so. And on top of that, actually quite a lot of people said that in fact the way that digital connection worked was a surrogate, as this gentleman so nicely puts, because they felt it didn't really replace the intimate connections they had before. So it wasn't like a real physical meeting where you could see each other in the eye, as the other gentleman says here of 95, where you could really see each other and show appreciation for the other, and be meaningful to each other. So the contact was considered more superficial. So digital connectedness was in that sense also an emphasis that in fact they were disconnected from people that really were important to them. And on top of that, there was another issue playing, especially in the beginning. So when we did our second round of interviews in October, people felt that also the solidarity between generations and between other people was lost. So on the one hand, they, especially after a few months, they felt that the digital connection didn't really live up to what they had before. And on top of that, they felt like the societal connection was reduced, where in the beginning especially older adults felt seen and appreciated by small tokens, gifts, initiatives to help them out while they had to stay at home. This slowly disappeared in the course of the COVID-19 crisis. And they felt put away as kind of the ones being a burden on society and having to live in a society that looked at them as if they were the ones for which other people had to give up their lives. And in the Netherlands especially, debates about a limitation or a rationing of IC beds in the IC departments was something which was heavily discussed, because they felt like if there would be an age limit on the IC admittance, it would mean that someone else would decide for them whether or not they had a choice to live. And I think this really heightened for people the feeling that they were no longer considered a valuable a contribution in society, a burden, and instead a burden on society. So especially those people who felt seen in the very beginning, like the female of 92 here, the second statement, she felt like in the beginning she was appreciated, she was seen, there was little gifts and cards and flowers, and then in October, she was seen as someone who was blocking the way of society starting again. So she felt actually really disappointed by the end of October. So my key messages for today is that it's very important to look at the heterogeneity among older adults. For some people, digital connectedness is indeed an opportunity. For others, this is not the case, and they actually have more trouble getting online, and instead, actually, there's kind of a magnification of disadvantage for them, because not only are they not online, they can also limit their access to other things. And I remember 2 weeks ago, I had a discussion group with people with low literacy, older adults with low literacy. And now with the COVID-19 app, they have an even harder time to accessing different leisure activities, because they're already excluded by their low literacy, and on top of this they're now also excluded because of the COVID-19 measures. So there's a big difference and a large diversity among older adults, but it's very important to keep that in mind if we make policies for digital connectedness. It's also important to incorporate their voices, because I think one of the key things in the COVID-19 crisis was that older adults felt left out of the discussion. They felt not being heard, really. And whereas the crisis was really about them, they were rarely literally heard. It's also important to keep an eye on possibilities. So although it seems like a big step to get everyone online in the future, I do think if we work together with older adults, there's a lot of opportunity to help them in digital connectedness. So I'm thinking now of different initiatives here, but I remember one of the ladies, 63-year-old, so relatively young, she was from a lower socioeconomic background, had a hard time getting by during the COVID-19 crisis. She had a hard time reaching out to others because she was a single mother. Her son lived somewhere else, so she couldn't really reach out to him. She was also quite scared because she was lower literate and she didn't quite understand the measures, so she had a hard time interpreting them. But she was very, very happy with WhatsApp and video calling, because that allowed her to safely reach out to others. So it's also, even for this group that seems very disadvantaged from the outside, it's important to keep looking at the possibilities. And it's also important to look at how we frame and address older adults, especially if you look in the discussions in the Netherlands on using the term, for instance, vulnerable. That was really something which people did not identify with. And if people don't identify with that, they don't listen to your message. They don't feel represented. So that's something which is really important to keep in mind. So all in all, I think the key message is that if we want to reach out to inclusivity, it's really important to involve older adults themselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yolanda. Any clarifying questions? No? Then we go to Itai Mannheim, which will be here online. That's not because he preferred to be online, but circumstances brought him to give it participation online.
Yes, hello, do you hear me?
Yeah. Okay, Itai, go ahead.
Yes, thanks. I hope you hear me, and I don't know if you see my slides. Please let me know.
Yeah, we see a slide and we see you in the slide. So.
Yeah, but that's not the presentation yet. But while they put it, I will start by apologizing I cannot be there in person. Like you said, it's due to circumstances here. And I'm joining you from Eindhoven in the Netherlands, where I'm doing my PhD on ageism and digital technology. Yeah, now you see the slide, I think. And you can go already to the next slide. And my PhD is part of a multidisciplinary group that is part of a Horizon 2020 project called Euro-Ageism. And we are a group of 15 PhD researchers and universities and partner organizations throughout Europe and Israel. And we're all doing research on ageism from different perspectives, such as the media, which was discussed here earlier, the workforce, legislation, and my topic as well, and some others in the group is about digital technology. Next slide, please. And I don't really need to even present this question because I think Caroline and Yolanda already addressed this, if digital technology is an opportunity or a challenge. And this is the starting point of my presentation. And on the one hand, we have a vast and exponential technological development, which holds opportunities in many areas, such as banking and finance and social activity, as we also heard, and also healthcare. But on the other hand, we have a sense of digital divide and also vast differences between countries. Pauline addressed some numbers, but this is also widely different between different countries, with some countries having above 90% of participation in using smartphones, for example, or being online, and other EU countries closer to 30%. So we also have a very wide difference between countries in connectivity. Specifically in my presentation today, I want to try and address how our research, not only mine, other colleagues in the network as well, how our research leads us to believe that ageism might be an underlying factor that can influence how people use or don't use digital technology. And importantly, I want to talk on how maybe ageism is the factor and not necessarily chronological age or being old is a barrier to using or adopting digital technology, as is sometimes very easily presented as such. And I liked also that Caroline addressed, is it a matter of time? Because I think this is an important question. Is it only a matter of a cohort or learning about using internet, or perhaps also in the future, some technologies will be different and we will need to learn them. So in 10 years, will it be smartphones or something else? That is one thing. And the other thing is, if ageism is influencing if we use or don't use, if this is something we don't solve, is that going to change in the next cohort or not? Next slide, please. So first of all, I will try to define how we relate to ageism as being comprised of stereotypes, which is how we think about aging and older people, prejudice, which is how we feel, and discrimination, which is how we act towards older people. And when we try to analyze and understand this, the meaning of ageism for policy and adoption of digital technology, we found also that ageism can influence use and adoption in different levels. And these levels can also interact with each other. Next slide, please. So the first level I want to talk about is the design and policy level, or you can also address this as the macro level. And we first of all need to address that ageism, or the discourse, sorry, not ageism, but the discourse of aging is many times defined as a problem. So we have challenges of aging. And in this context, aging is many times discoursed in relation to frailty, dependency, cognitive decline. Whereas digital technology is many times addressed as a solution to some of these challenges. And as such, we have also a fixation when it comes to technology many times on developing aging technologies for care and healthcare. Whereas we also know that the wants or needs or desires of older persons do not only relate to the field of care and healthcare. And ageism can be, and we found several types of evidence that ageism can be embedded in the design process. And perhaps the most clear form can be exclusion. So completely not being part of the design process in which they don't have a voice. But also being involved in the design process does not necessarily account for inclusive design. So also how people are involved in design, which older persons are involved in the design process, and how their voice is incorporated in the actual design into a meaningful partnership has a lot of meaning. Stereotypes and beliefs of stakeholders involved, be them young designers or healthcare professionals or family members, can also influence how the technology is designed and what kind of scripts for using it embeds within it. And further, we found also that some technologies are actually stigmatizing. And just for example, an emergency button, it's not very sophisticated digital technology, but some emergency buttons, for example, are designed as a necklace with a big plastic button on the neck, and some people will not go with it just because it stigmatizes them and cries out dependency. Next slide, please. One thing I forgot to say about the previous slide, I will also say though that when we talk also about stakeholders that are involved, we also need to acknowledge the positive side. So they might also have an empowering role. And the next level is the social environment or the meso environment. It's also social organizational environment. And on this level, we relate to organizations, service providers, vendors, for example, healthcare professionals. If we talk about the fixation on care and healthcare, then we also understand that healthcare professionals and their attitudes towards aging have a crucial or pivotal role in adoption of digital technology. Peers or work colleagues, family members, and many of the interaction around digital technology is also actually an intergenerational interaction, whether it's explaining or helping people to use digital technology, and this can be in any age, by the way, especially when we are introduced constantly with new apps, new technologies. We ask each other questions, and how we ask each other questions and how we give each other answers in an intergenerational interaction can influence if people use or don't. Media and advertisement about digital technology, and I think the previous speakers said also something about this. Next slide, please. And the final level is the individual level, or the micro level. And here we need to understand that throughout our life course, we internalize and learn about stereotypes of old age. And this is in every domain, not only technology. And we learn what is appropriate. And we also sometimes, not knowingly or even implicitly, apply this on ourselves. I'm too old to use technology is the simplest form of explaining what self-ageism or self-negative perspectives on aging and technology might be. Technology by itself might even pose a stereotypical threat. So technology is many times associated with young and newness. And we see that many times also in advertisements, for example. So even the presence of technology can actually induce stereotype threat and ageism. And this also relates to emotion and motivation. And negative emotions could be fear of using technology, but it can also be being ashamed if someone sees me as someone who is not capable to use technology. Next slide, please. I want to give maybe a quick example with very preliminary results of a study that we are doing now. We're finalizing actually the study at the moment, and we're doing this in the Netherlands, and the JNF has actually also helped us with the data collection. So this is still ongoing, but some preliminary results just to show you how ageism can also influence on the individual level of using technology. And our main goal in this study was to investigate if, rather than chronological age, which is many times assumed to be a barrier to using technology, maybe ageism can influence in the context of technology acceptance models. And our main question was, how does ageism influence the use and acceptance? And we had an online questionnaire and a pen and paper questionnaire as well. So we tried to avoid being biased by asking about digital technology and only including people who do an online questionnaire. So we also had the option to give a pen and paper questionnaire, and I'm happy that we have at least 25% of the responses that are also pen and paper. So I'm hoping it's less biased than what it could be. At the moment, we have a little bit less than 300 responses. And the age range was between 50 and 87, and our criteria was 50 plus. And why did we use people from 50 plus? Not because we think they are old, but society many times talks about people of 50 plus as being old in relation to technology. And we see that in the workforce. We see it also, for example, in reports. The AARP report about people and using technology is about 50 plus. And we also found evidence to this in some of our studies. So we asked people from 50 plus to fill this questionnaire. The mean age was around 70. It was relatively balanced age-wise. And 44% of the sample was female. Next slide, please. So just to give a little bit of really preliminary results, and at the moment it could be maybe even a bit biased because we didn't include yet the pen and paper questionnaires. And also you need to consider that the sample is from people 50 plus and not 65 plus. But we see that everyday use of smartphones, people that indicated that they use smartphones every day was 93%. Computers a bit less, but if we consider also smartphones as being connected, then it's still high. People in our sample, 88% indicated that they use online banking at least once a week. All in all, 73% use communication apps such as WhatsApp, Zoom, and 58% are connected to social media. More importantly, and this is what we mainly wanted to see, we found correlations between measurements of self-ageism, experienced ageism, so if someone experienced ageism in the last year, and attitudes towards how older people use technology. So this is kind of a specific technology ageism scale. And we found correlations between these measurements of ageism and measurements of technology acceptance. So at the moment, I'm just talking about simple correlations, and we will use a model, a more sophisticated model context when we go deeper into the analysis. But we already find that there's correlations between higher levels of self-ageism or experienced ageism, which is uncontrollable because it's how I experience society, on intention to use, on performance expectancy of technology, on effort expectancy, if I believe that using technology is easy, habits and actual use. So this is already in the direction of our hypothesis that ageism can influence actual use of technology. We still need to see in the context of the whole model if when we add chronological age, what is stronger, chronological age or ageism? Next slide, please. So to conclude, I want to talk about some policy recommendations, which are also summarized in a policy report that you can find on the Your Ageism website. And start with a statement that there is a need for a paradigm shift in our understanding of what digital technologies older persons want and need, older individuals' abilities to use digital technology and learn how to use digital technology. And also in how older persons are included in having a say in their design process of digital technologies and related policies. And I'm happy that also the previous presenters said this, because it shows, I think, some kind of consistency in this manner. And in order to improve digital literacy and increase use and adoption of digital technology, policy interventions need to focus on eliminating stereotypes and prejudice and discrimination based on age, rather than accepting aging per se as a barrier to the use and adoption of technology and thinking that perhaps the next cohort or it's only a matter of time will pass this. Next slide, please. More specific recommendations relate to tackling technology-related ageism and ageism in general through awareness and training. And specifically, I'm in a faculty of healthcare professions, and they don't receive a lot of training about aging, mainly biological aspects, but what it means to age, what do older people want and need, and how they use technology, for example, is not something that is in the curriculum at the moment, and we're trying to change that. And from the experience with the students, for example, when we talk to them about these issues, you can see suddenly a great change in how they talk about the subject. Empowerment of individuals of all ages in accessing and using digital technology, and supporting also more positive intergenerational contact around technology and in technology training programs. We think also that there's a need to examine and change the discourse on aging and technology in the media. That was also discussed in previous presentations here, and design and policy discussions on program developments that include digital technology. Last slide, please. Next slide. Finally, in relation to design and policy, we need to foster inclusion of older persons in digital technology-related policy. And when we talk about inclusion, it's not only being part, but it's also aiming for a partnership or a meaningful relationship in which they really have a say throughout the whole design process, and not only in a late stage or in one initial stage. It really needs to be a partnership and throughout the whole process. So that was my final remark. In the next slide, if you want, you can see there's a link to the policy report brief that we have. You can find it on the Eurageism website. And thank you again for inviting me here.
Okay. Thank you, Itai. Anyone with a clarifying question? No? I have one. I know you did a poll. You asked people to fill in forms. In what way did the need to use internet to take part in the survey influenced your result? Have you any idea?
Well, I cannot say for 100% how it influenced, but how we tried to relate to this was mainly that we also offered the option to do it pen and paper, and many people approached us to do this, but also we tried to contact additional organizations, also GNF, to actually meet groups and give a pen and paper version to a bigger group of people. So that we have a combination of people who did it also in pen and paper, and it's more or less 25% of our sample. But I cannot, of course, say for sure that it's unbiased, but I would be worried if I would present to you results of only internet-based survey.
Okay, thank you very much. And then we go to our last speaker, Tobias Kotat. He is the active politician at this side of the hall, but he's also involved in as a politician in the European affairs and regional relations, and the Commission for Education, which is an appropriate place to be, where you have to learn to work with all the new hardware. Tobias.
Thank you well, Gerrit, and thanks to you, to IED, to JNF, and my esteemed colleague, Vice President Gabi Schmidt, for the honor and the chance to be part of this high-level panel. And as a regional member of Parliament, as you said, Chairman of the European Affairs Committee and Vice Chairman of the Education Committee in the Bavarian Landtag, and to have the chance to give you a point of view on digital democracy from the practical side as a politician and also from the regional side from Bavaria. And that's where I wanted to start. But first, when I prepared my speech, I also, as everyone, asked Mr. Google News. And when I asked Mr. Google News for the issue of digital democracy, I picked out 3 headlines which describe the problem or the challenge of this very good as far as I think. The first one was digital democracy still a long way off in Africa. It takes more than tech. The second was Europe's searching for its digital way to citizens. And the third one in a Bavarian newspaper was stumbling stones on the construction site of the digital city hall. So as you can see, 3 parts of the world, bigger, smaller ones, but all of them are still searching for the right way to manage digital democracy. And I think this is the very interesting point where we are, where all of us are at the moment to try to find the right way to create a new environment for digital democracy. Let me start with the status and perspective of digital democracy and e-government in Bavaria. I'd say Bavaria is, without doubt, the leading region in Germany regarding digitalization in e-government and digital public services, but we are still only in midfield compared to other countries in Europe or worldwide, like Estonia or Taiwan. Only since October 2019, we've invested around 50 million euro to support the development of digital municipalities. We also support the training of municipal officials regarding e-government and digitalization. Because we know that behind every digital service, you have to have the man, the woman who knows to deal with this service. In 2018, we initiated the Digital Citizens Report 2030, Bavaria, It's Your Future. More than 20,000 citizen experts articulated their ideas for the future of Bavaria in over 150,000 contributions which have been incorporated into Bavaria's cross-departmental sustainability strategy. Digital instruments were the mainstay of this citizen participation. In 2020, we've launched the Bayern app as a digital one-stop shop for all aspects and levels of e-government, no matter whether you want to contact your mayor, ask for a new passport, register your dog, or contact the government. Around 1,500 cities have already joined and implemented the Bayern app on their level, but we are still on the beginning of a long way. Digital education is a strong focus of our party and our government in Bavaria. Our aim is to make the younger generation fit for all the digital challenges, including a critical and informed reflection of digital information. Therefore, we've invested more than 2 billion euros since 2018 to improve the digital setting of our schools. We've also started to build the so-called digital schoolhouse, including a digital classroom, digital staff room, digital school administration, digital teaching resource room, as well as instrument of digital participation, information, and information. What we have hardly developed in Bavaria and Germany so far is the digitalization of elections. I regret this because click and vote offers a great opportunity to get more people to the ballot box, provided it is safe. Let's go further to the digital democracy from my perspective, the perspective of a regional politician. During the pandemic situation, we've all made our own experiences with new digital challenges and tools. Digital democracy has again increased the status of transparency in Bavaria and everywhere. Almost all government agencies now publish official documents on the internet. You just need to find them. At the same time, citizens have, for example, the often used instrument of e-petitions for political participation, for example, in our Landtag. Thus, the internet has democratized opinion more strongly and also makes the political views of people visible who previously had no discernible voice. All parties in Germany, including ours, have developed new processes for digital participation for their members and even instruments of e-politics for non-members to get them informed about the party's positions. At the same time, we all have seen the limits. Politics need to be close to the people, especially regional politics that affects everyone's daily life much more concreter than, for example, the European framework. Whatever we decide in the Bavarian Landtag, it changes the daily life of 13 million people in Bavaria. And they want to be informed, they want to be a part of the decision-making process. Therefore, it is still and still will be necessary to listen to the people and to speak to them directly. No app ever will replace the direct dialogue or the, let's say, emotional speech of a politician in a Bavarian beer tent, as you can imagine. Nevertheless, especially digital participation and polls on every political level can help us to improve the realistic approach of our decisions. Let's go back to the limits of digital democracy from, again, a politician's point of view. It's a fact that the internet sometimes is used deliberately for disinformation or to stir up public opinion. Often it is not people at all who generate the information, but bots. The problem of fake news is pushed by the fact that social networks create bubbles and echo chambers. This means that Facebook, Twitter, and others can lead to a situation where democratic discourse is not increased, but can no longer take place. Another problem, voting means it's one man, one vote. But on the internet, sometimes it's one opinion, many votes. And opinion on the internet is unfortunately sometimes for sale. Likes and followers are available in any number for just a few euros, created by fake profiles or click workers from the other end of the world. They suggest opinion and meaning, but are in fact only paid propaganda. And we still have the social peer groups which are not used to or able to be digital natives, as it was mentioned already in the other speeches. Like the silver generation, disabled people, socially disadvantaged persons. If we really want to guarantee a participative digital democracy, we cannot accept to exclude those people. And it will be one of the biggest challenges for us to create digital participation for everyone, not only for the digital nerdy ones. One point I'd like to address also from the regional point of view, but with a strong European aspect, is digital democracy and the running conference on the future of Europe. Let me address this only shortly and as a last point. The conference started into the COVID crisis, and it has been a problematic process from the beginning on. Beside all efforts made by the European Commission, the Parliament, and the Committee of the Regions to get the conference's assembly attached to the citizens. Until summer of 2022, the EU wants to get a new citizen-based vision of their political pathway to the future. But we have to be honest and realistic. This debate has, until today, not really been a public debate, including the citizen in a broad meaning. Even the now started citizen panels do not guarantee the necessary level of participation. I'd say even the European Convention 2001 had more public visibility than the conference has reached until today. There we also can see the problem and limits of digital participation. It needs much more to get this common and public consent and success. The COFEFE needs to leave the Brussels bubble, needs to leave the backroom of politics. We can't do it by just putting up big posters in the streets of Brussels or having tea in the beautiful surrounding of Strasbourg's European Parliament. If the 22 conference is to be a success, it must get out into the streets and squares, into the towns and villages. Then it needs a whole new analog and real dimension in addition to the digital one. Let me get to a conclusion with 6 points, concluding the 4 points I've mentioned before. First, I'm pretty sure that digital democracy and e-government need further to be developed, and Europe is the place to be for this. We should be the think tank and home of real and inclusive digital democracy in a global leadership. Digital democracy is also a social challenge. Second, digital democracy will always complement, not replace, the real and human dimensions of politics. Third, digital participation is a challenge for all of us. Those who participate more must be ready for more dialogue. And dialogue must be followed by action. Otherwise, participation only creates frustration. Fourth, digital votes is a huge challenge for all countries in Europe. We should work together to create the safe systems at a high level. Maybe it also needs to be the EU that offers secure servers, networks, and blockchain technologies for that. Fifth, especially the local and regional level that needs to be supported on their way to a functioning and holistic digital approach in municipalities and agencies. Sixth, last but not least, we need to act, not just to talk. In theory, no democracy becomes more digital and no digital offer becomes more inclusive. What is needed is a new digital participation pact between politics, business, science, and society in Europe, including all political levels, from the local mayor to the European Commission's president. Thank you.
Thank you. And this, with this last contribution of our speakers, we come to the discussion. And the word is to you, and the word is to the people who watched it from home or their offices and had the opportunity to ask questions. But I turn to the whole Istvan. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much. So, my name is István Szirtő-Radics. I'm from Hungary, and I'm also a former mayor. So, I would like to highlight this issue with a very recent example from my country, Hungary. So, how important to include the elderly people and the elderly voters to the overall digitalization of our present world. What has happened in Hungary in the last months, we quite unique in Europe on the European political practice. It is very common in the United States, where there are primary elections in every 4 years, both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. But now in Hungary, we organized the United Democratic Opposition. We organized a primary election for the next year general elections. It has very specific reasons why we had to do that, because we had a semi-authoritarian regime in Hungary, which is ruling now the country, and changed the election rules, the election law for the government's favor, and the only way to win for the opposition, to unite all the forces. And we had to find one prime minister candidate and only one opposition candidate in each election district in Hungary, which is 106. And we organized this election. It was very successful. 8% of the overall voters in Hungary showed up at the polls, which is better than the figures in the United States. And what was very interesting, that 1/4 of the votes were online votes, because we made to be able to vote online. And this 1/4 online votes made the final decision between the two prime minister candidates, and who won the race. His name is Peter Márki-Zay. It's a very nice gentleman, and hopefully he will be the Hungarian prime minister from the next year, if we are lucky. So he won with these online votes. And after the deeper look at to the votes after the election, it turned out with an analysis that these online votes, the majority, 75%, came from the age group under 40 years, which meant that the elderly people didn't vote online because they were not able to do that, and the reasons were listed from the speakers of the panel. So it means that politicians who would like to win elections must have a look at on this issue. Even in these member states of the European Union, where the online voting is available, and I guess there are quite a few of these member states, because this recent Hungarian experience highlights the importance how to include and why it is very important to include the elderly people of the overall digitalization, to help them to practice their political rights, even on the online area. And just to close down my my comments, Tobias mentioned the posters. So if we go out and look at the Charlemagne, there's a big poster that Next Generation EU. So in the Next Generation Fund and in the European Recovery and Resilience Fund, there are allocated money for the so-called digital action plan of the European Union, and even this action plan is ready now for the next financial programming period from 2021 to 2027, and it's up to the member states how to deliver these funds to their countries, and how effectively they can do that. And I'm afraid a little bit that not all of the member states will be ready and able to fulfill their duties, because it's a duty. And I think it could be very important to monitor, not only on the European level, but also in the everyday people and civic level, how the member states can use this unique opportunity to include the elderly people to the digital world. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Who of the speakers would like to react? Tobias? Yeah.
Thanks for this comment. two things. The one thing is regarding the online vote, the digital vote. I'd say digital vote should never be exclusive. You still should have the possibility to have your vote at the ballot box in your town hall, wherever. That means that also elderly people can join if they are not online. But let me tell you the story from Germany. We don't have a possibility for online votes. So everybody who does not want to or can't go to on the voting day to vote, he has to do vote by letter, by snail mail. Yeah? That means that the cards for the letters are sent to the people, I think, 4 weeks before election, and normally latest 14 days before the election day, most of the voters of the letter voters have already voted. That's a problem for the politicians because at the end time of the campaign, you know that if 50% of the people who vote are voting by letters, means that most of them, let's say 30% of the total amount, have already given their vote, and you're still running. So that is a problem, and therefore I think the digital vote is a better way, because then I can open the vote and you can vote wherever you are. You can be on the Bahamas, and you can give your vote on this day in Germany, but you don't have to do it 2 weeks before the end of the campaign. The second thing, I completely agree that we have to have a very, very good eye on the millions and billions which are spent by the European Union and given to the member states for the whole recovery process, but also especially for the digital development. Because every cent which is not coordinated in this field is spent for nothing. So we have to see that we have this puzzle, and as I said, we have to have some fields in the digital process that has to be concentrated on the European level. Many other things can be done on the national or regional level, but some things have to be coordinated on the European level, because otherwise we'll never get to one way in this very important thing. And I don't have to tell you, we've lost many possibilities to be in a leadership in innovative things and ways from the European point of view. So we still have the possibility to be in a leading role in this field if we go together, but then we have to coordinate.
Yeah, thank you for that comment. I think it's a very important issue to think about the election process. In fact, I've done some work on that, and it appears that in general, in most countries of the world, older people much more often vote because they think it's important, they want to participate, they've done it before, they're used to it. Older people in general vote much more than younger people. And maybe you remember that when Obama was elected, that was in the beginning of the use of social media. And for that reason, he could attract many more younger voters, which makes him, in the end, the winning president. So I think the fact that there might be a possibility to vote digitally, and as you say, probably it's people under 40, might also be an inclusion on the younger part of the voters, which might also be a positive side that decreases the intergenerational gap. Because the intergenerational gap existed or increased because of COVID, the whole issue of healthcare, and also because of the digitalization. So maybe to include younger people in the whole election process by the possibility of digital voting, I think that could be a very positive sign. And indeed, I also agree with you and with Tobias that the monitoring on the way the EU money is spent on those issues and the restructuring the economy it's very important. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, no, okay. Now, Itai, are you surprised by the lack of participation of people over 40 in those opportunity to vote online?
Well, that field isn't really my expertise, but I would also say that it doesn't necessarily come from lack of capabilities. So it could also be a manner of habit on how people do certain tasks, for example, voting. But it could also be, and it's maybe interesting to see differences between European countries on this manner as well. It could also be a manner of infrastructure and availability. And I think this also raises, maybe to relate a bit broader to the issue of digitalization of services as well. I think this also raises a question of infrastructure and access to internet. And is access to internet, for example, a basic civil right in times in which services are becoming digitalized? Perhaps only one more comment, and I agree with Tobias on this, is that in order to be inclusive, especially something very sensitive as voting can, at least not now, be completely digitalized. So there should also always be the option, even during COVID, and I'm not an expert on voting, but I could see around me that different countries and elections found ways during elections to also provide during COVID with restrictions, voting on site, physical.
Other questions? Yeah? Yolanda?
Yeah, we received one question over Slido. You've seen the QR code, so people can participate from remote. One question, how can the EU legislators improve digital inclusivity? Is it just a member states' competence, or do you think the EU can do something at its level?
Yeah. That's a big question. Who wants to?
Well, maybe in general, I think the EU is quite competent to develop funds to raise money one way or another. So I think they do. They might stimulate the whole transformation and address the social disparities in the different countries. That's one. So money-wise, they can do something. I can imagine that they do, and they already do. But they could do a little bit more, maybe on the research issues, comparative analysis between countries, between regions, best practices, all of those. There might also be a possibility for a European learning agenda. Macron initiated that idea of European universities. I can imagine that they have that there can be a lifelong curriculum developed from a European perspective, which can stimulate different governments, national governments, to do similar projects. Yeah, so educational-wise, economic-wise, and research-wise, I think there are many opportunities for at the European level.
And I think, if I may say myself, that where the Union also focus on those areas where people feel left behind in economic development, this is one of the key issues in economic development. And you see that where there are more accessibility to internet, the density of the large cities, take for example Paris, will diminish, and you see that in the rest of the country of France, you see that the other cities are growing, and there's a shift to the south, and the internet certainly promotes that a bit, and lots of people have now the opportunity, when working from home, being able to keep contact, and where we in COVID-19, and I do hope it won't last that long, but we may have a shift in the way a working place is defined, as certainly for the moment, as partly at home and partly at an office where it's possible. It's not possible when you're building a home, but it's possible when you do administrative work, when you do regulations, things like that. It's possible to work from home. So I think there will be a shift, and the European Union can certainly promote by investing enough in those areas that are left behind in further development to do that. I think that's more profitable than to hand out protection to some farmers in an area far away which depend on one product. You better promote it everywhere there will be possibility of getting connected. But the next step is, how can you connect everybody, knowing that a number of people simply never will be able to do it, and will not be able to do it because only the infrastructure won't be enough. You still have to have the means to buy things like smartphones, knowing that smartphones outdates very quickly, that the large companies, whether it's Apple or others, don't do any maintenance on the programs, so you're forced to buy another newer product to replace the other at a relatively high speed. And the sustainability in phones, sustainability in notebooks, iPads are still not up to standard when you talk about sustainability. There are too much fast, outdated products, and that's simply also a question of enough money for people in the whole of society to do it. Not for those like us who are in the front of the development, but for all those others, it certainly will be. Other questions? Yeah.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Julia Wadou. I'm working for Age Platform Europe. It's the European platform of all the people. We are based here in Brussels. It's just to add on the previous question and what was said. I think there is still something important that the European Union could do better. It's also about the mainstreaming of aging issues. So when you look at what is done at the moment in terms of digital education plan, this is something that the European Commission has launched. But you can hardly see the target group of all the people being included, you know, as if, and Caroline mentioned it, lifelong learning is already quite out of the scope of policies. But if you speak about lifelong learning of all the people, considering that when you are still working but beyond the retirement age, it's important to, you know, be able to access training, to be able to continue to learn whatever you would like is something important. And at least in terms of narrative, there is a gap and something that is missing, and where we would need the European Union be probably stronger to at least, you know, encourage member states to do better as well at their level. And there is something else that the EU could do also, is to gather more data. In terms of statistics, we are still lacking quite a number of things. I remember for quite a long time we have battled and advocated to have statistics looking at all the people in digitalization that were disaggregated by subgroup of age, you know. So for a long time it was only looking at people over the age of 65 plus. while, well, actually, if you consider the, you know, how many years you still have to live, there will be changes in your life. Now you have subgroups. I think it's 60 to 75 and 75 to 80 and then 80 plus, something like that. But it's really important. And also having cross-cutting data, you know, like Caroline and Yolanda mentioned clearly, the question of the socioeconomic background, the ethnic background, and so forth and so on is really important to make sure that, well, actually, when we will address the policies, it will target the groups in the right way, instead of having this homogeneous approach of aging issues, which is probably a question that is, not really the right one. So there's still a lot of things that we can do. I know that I think the Fundamental Rights Agency, which is one of the agencies of the European Union, is going to start a study actually on digitalization and the rights of older people. So to look actually, you know, at those gaps and how much it entails the rights of older people in different types of area. And I think what will be important is trying to make sure that beyond the area of health and care, which is usually the one we are looking at, completely forgetting about the fact that, well, older people are not only patient, and quite a lot of them are not patient at all, actually. It's important as well to consider all that areas. And just a little thing coming back to the vote and the accessibility to vote, I think it's important to think about the accessibility of digital tools, you know, when it comes to vote, when you have this one. But actually, the physical access is still quite of an issue for a number of people, being people with disabilities or older people. So it's also something to bear in mind. You know, it's not because you can vote in a station that it's fully accessible. It's not today. It's not the case. And sometimes actually the digital part is a way for some people to access votes, because actually it's much more complicated for them to go to the ballot voting bureau than actually using an online system. And this is something to bear in mind as well, you know, kind of a balance. It's a bit more complicated than, you know, only the online inaccessibility.
And something we also learned from Yolanda, from the answers the elderly people gave, that people want to have a real contact with other people. And not so much, that could be physical contact. A lot of elderly people misses out on physical contact with their loved ones. But also, I see it myself. I get annoyed when I have to ask questions and there's just a robot answering me and can't find the answer to my questions. And then I have to wait and try again, and then maybe in the long run a real person gets behind the keyboard to try to find an answer, and you can't get anyone on the telephone. And the government, the Dutch government, is promoting my government, but that means that you're from the government and not that the government is mine, because the government owns me and the government wants me to do everything in their way when they try. And when I have a problem, I want to speak to someone to clarify if it's only my problem or anyone else's problem. So there's always a chance that you miss a lot of things by doing that. And on the other hand, I must say, in the 80s, I worked already with what was called image telephoning, that people could telephone, elderly people in homes could telephone with an image of the other person. And if I see it nowadays, we're not so far away from what was then. So there are much more opportunities now, but not so much offering to people to be able to speak. And then they can speak to another person. They are more accustomed to it than in the 80s when I worked with it, but still there's a lot of other social factors that you should also include when you have these conversations between a carer and a person who will be cared for. Tobias?
We still have time. I'd add just 2 sentences on this issue. Working for the European Parliament before, I had the chance to work on the European Year for Active Aging and Solidarity of Generations, especially with the stakeholders like age at this time. And the digital participation was one of the focuses we had in this year, and also one of the results that there's a lot to do. And the result, there's a lot to do, but it's also a big chance for the silver generation, because as you said, sometimes we have more barriers in the real world than in the digital world. You just have to find a pathway for the older generation to the office. Dealing with this, I have to say, as a regional politician, we just have to respect subsidiarity and competences. And in this case, regarding the doing, the European Union is not the first level or in the first role to do this. It's much more the national or the regional or even the communal, the local level. But what Europe can do is, on the one hand, as Karen said, to gather an environment sensibility for this issue, for lifelong learning and for participation. And the second big thing is Europe can do a lot more than today to finance and to coordinate research and to push research on this issue. Research in the meaning of, for example, inclusive and barrier-free product design, or the barrier-free office in digital things, because you can do a lot to make it easier for elder people, but also for disabled people to take part. And this is something Europe can do a lot and give much more money than at the moment to universities all over Europe to be in a leading role regarding this worldwide.
Okay. Thank you, Tobias. Well, I look at the clock, and my timetable says that we should conclude. I thank you all very much for participating. I thank the speakers for their contribution. This is not a conclusive meeting. This was a meeting to address the problem for the first time in a sometimes what broader context than it's usually made. So my organization, the Jan Nagel Foundation 50+, will continue to work on it, and maybe this conference will get a follow-up next year, but we all know how difficult it is. We are very lucky that we just in time had this conference facing maybe more lockdowns coming, or more severe measures coming for COVID. But we continue with our surveying program, and we hope to see you then when we have a next conference on the same topic. Thank you very much.